The defamation trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard has revealed a lot through tapes, recordings, and of course, testimonies. But there are many behavior signals that paint a picture way more complex than you can judge at first sight, including the disturbing reason why Amber was copying Johnny's clothes on the first days. Welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and it would be great if you join us by just liking this video, subscribing, and hitting that bell. Let's get down to it. The greatest challenge so far is that every day of the trial has been 8 to 10 hours of footage, so to make it more practical, I'm going to describe from the general clues to the more specific tales. And one has to be very careful with the circumstances for each person that we are going to analyze. Let's take, for example, Johnny's friend, Isaac Baruch, and Johnny's sister, Christy. At first sight, you have two vastly different body language displays. Isaac is kind of nervous, moving a lot, nodding many times even as he speaks, and stuttering a lot. There is a very clear hand signal that is speaking with his palm up and shrugging at the same time. Like, I have nothing to hide. That fidgeting is a clear signal that he's in distress. He doesn't feel comfortable at all of being there and having to recall everything that happened. Now, being in distress or nervous does not mean that he's not telling the truth. It can just mean that he feels uneasy for the situation. And in fact, one of the key questions was, how did he perceive Johnny and Amber's relationship? And he answered that he always saw them as a loving couple, that most of the time there was nothing more they'll see than a man and a woman that really loved being together. What's more, that Amber always treated him, Isaac, with respect, deference, and in a very warm way. This is important, and please remember this because that's gonna be useful later on. His voice is something worth mentioning, like the moment that he's almost on the verge of breaking down and he says that he just wants both of them to find peace. Now, remember that Isaac's recollections are the point of view of a friend. Well, what happens when we switch to Johnny's sister, Christy? It's a totally different behavior. She's calm, collected, thinks before speaking, her voice tone is stable all along, and there are very few strong emotional displays. Then, does it mean that she's not telling the truth? And that's something that we really need to be aware of. We cannot jump to conclusions from the body language of one person to the other. And that's why it's so dangerous to believe that any gesture has a specific meaning that applies to any situation. I mentioned that Isaac was speaking from the point of view of a friend, but Christy is speaking as a sister with all the memories she's sharing about Johnny's mother and how she treated him and his father. That was, beyond the subject of the trial, painful to watch because most people just cannot even consider the possibility that a woman could do all those things to her own child. That is a way to understand Johnny's statement later on when he was asked, "Why didn't you leave Amber?" And he answered, because Miss Heard had made life threats against herself. So Johnny was instantly taken back to the moment his own father left and his mother tried exactly the same. So Johnny wants to make it clear that he stayed because he did not want to be a failure. And this possibly comes from his dysfunctional household and upbringing. This can happen to any person that ends up developing savior complex. And if you combine it with a strong work ethic, then you can end up thinking about your relationship as something that must be saved at all costs, even your own integrity or safety. Think about Will and Jada Pinkett Smith. And this is not healthy. In his own words, "I didn't want to fail. I wanted to try to make it work. I thought maybe I could help her. I thought maybe I could bring her around because the Amber Heard that I knew for the first year and a half was not this. Suddenly this opponent, it wasn't my girl. She had become my opponent." Now, I found it really interesting how Johnny described his first year and a half of marriage with Amber as, and I quote, "She was too good to be true. She was attentive, loving, smart, kind, funny, understanding. We had many things in common, music, literature. For that year and a half, it was amazing." This can be surprising because how can everything turn out the way it did? And the problem is that this is exactly the way relationships with narcissists kick off. There's an immense love bombing and the person can't possibly imagine that things are not gonna end well. Now, nobody wants to be in a relationship with one of these toxic personalities, so we might as well learn to spot the signs. So you might be wondering, what were the first signs that made Johnny think that there was something odd? Well, it so happens that in all this attentive personality of Amber at first, one of the things she always did when Johnny came back home from work was to tell him to sit on the couch. She took his boots off and offered him a glass of wine. And well, he said to himself, this is great. I've never felt like this, like ever. But one day he arrived home and she was on the phone. She was busy, so he just sat on the couch, took off his boots and helped himself to a glass of wine. When she appeared, she put a Kathy Bates face and just asked the question, "What did you do?" And Johnny was confused, as in, "What did I do? What do you mean?" Amber replies, "You took your boots off." No, that's my job. That's what I do. Well, Johnny did not pay much attention to that at the moment. He just thought that Amber was trying to be helpful. But the fact is that one of the main obsessions of the narcissist is control. In the name of protection, safety, or even love, they're going to treat you like you don't have to do anything. As in, no, you will not drive to the mall. I can take you there. Yeah, it sounds exactly like someone who wants to be helpful. But the problem is when this becomes a controlling nature. Such as when Amber was going to sleep and Johnny was not sleepy, but instead he wanted to stay up and watch some TV. And she went like, "Nope, you're not going to watch TV. You're going to bed." And so what started like a cute quirk developed into something that began concerning Johnny. Like, I'm a 50-something man, I shouldn't be dealing with this kind of stuff. But back to his testimony, you can watch any clip of his, any moment of him recalling all the details, and he talks really slowly with sudden facial gestures. It looks like this process has been quite unnerving for him. In fact, one of the questions was, how did he feel about exposing so many intimate details in this trial? And his immediate answer was about his children. That he always wanted to protect them from any kind of fallout from his failed marriage, but this was a necessary step. This was the right thing to do. Even so, he laments not only how his children are going to be affected by all these revelations, but also his whole family. He goes as far as mentioning Amber, that he laments her intimate details being exposed like this. I'm sure that was not an easy thing to do, but that tells a lot about Johnny's character. We should also remember that Johnny doesn't like interviews, like at all. So if he doesn't like a 20-minute interview, you can guess that speaking for 1 or 2 hours about his intimate life can do to his behavior. And speaking of odd behaviors, it's a bit unsettling to see how Amber copied Johnny's clothing in the first days of the trial. I don't know what kind of strategy was that, or who was giving her advice, but what I can tell you is that if she wanted to look like the victim, she was getting the opposite effect. It's like when you do something and some prankster begins to imitate you or copy what you just said. It's uncomfortable. It's knowing that they are watching you and they are really aware of your actions. And that must also be the reason why Amber has been constantly looking in Johnny's direction throughout the trial, while Johnny, well, couldn't care less about her. That is strange, because if Amber was the abused, then why does she feel the need to constantly look to her abuser? And yes, she has displayed a lot of smirks that are not very consistent with the situation she allegedly went through. There's also some odd changes in behavior, like when she's got this facial expression, and when she's handed a note, her face changes completely in seconds. In general, what I've seen so far is that Johnny feels really comfortable and confident. I think his lawyers must have a very good case, and that is projected through his behavior. Again, these are just my first impressions from this trial. There's a massive amount of content to watch, and not to mention what we're going to see in the following weeks. So if you see any other clips or details that are worth analyzing, you can tag me on TikTok, Twitter, or Instagram. I will make sure to check them out. If you want to refine your observation skills, all you have to do is download my 100 body language tips right in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas, and it will always be a pleasure, my body language buddies. Much love and bliss.